In a small town where everybody somehow knew everyone's business, a mother named Linda Baldwin and her daughter Kayla had been at odds for nearly 2 years. Their disagreement didn't start with anything dramatic like betrayal or money stolen from a purse. Ironically, it began with something as common as a used car. Kayla had bought the car when she was 18. She was young, newly independent, and determined to prove that she could manage her own life. The car wasn't fancy, just an older sedan with more attitude than horsepower, but it gave her a sense of freedom she'd never felt before. But the freedom didn't last long. Within months, the car turned into a financial headache. Repairs started piling up. Kayla tried to juggle it while working part-time in home care services, but the bills outran her income. Every month brought a new problem. The engine coughing out smoke, the brakes squeaking loud enough to wake the neighborhood, and the battery dying at the worst possible times. Seeing her daughter struggle, Linda stepped in. She paid for one repair, then another, then another. At first she thought Kayla would pay her back eventually. But months passed, and Kayla couldn't keep up financially. She kept falling behind, and the more Linda helped, the more she felt taken advantage of. Finally, Linda reached her limit. One heated evening, after yet another argument over repair costs, Linda asked Kayla to hand the car back. "Give me the title," she said. "If you can't keep up with the expenses, I'll take the car and figure things out myself." Kayla, exhausted physically and emotionally, agreed. She signed away her ownership and stepped back from the issue altogether. She assumed that once the car was gone, the fighting would be over. In her mind, that was the end of the story. But for Linda, it was only the beginning. The car sat in Linda's driveway for months. Dust settled on the windshield. No one drove it. Linda insured it, thinking she would sell it soon. But time passed and she kept putting it off. Then something unexpected happened. Kayla, who had been saving quietly with her fiancé, bought a reliable used car of her own. When she came back to visit her mom and return a few old belongings, Linda noticed the new vehicle and suddenly felt a sting. Not jealousy exactly, but something close. "So she can afford a car now?" Linda thought. "But couldn't pay me back then?" Those emotions, resentment mixed with a sense of unfairness, boiled inside her. Before she realized it, she began to convince herself that Kayla still owed her something. Money, repayment, acknowledgement, anything that would balance the emotional scales. But Kayla believed she'd already fulfilled her part of the deal. When she borrowed the old car from her mother for a few months, after Linda had claimed ownership, she paid Linda $250 each month, exactly as agreed. She returned the car after 4 months, without a scratch, and moved on with her new life. To her, the story was over. To Linda, it was unfinished. Eventually, the tension between them grew so heavy that neither of them could keep it bottled up anymore. Linda insisted she was still owed money for repairs she made when Kayla originally owned the car. Kayla insisted she didn't owe anything because she gave up the car and all rights to it long ago. When the conversation got nowhere, they took the matter to a community dispute mediator. The mediator listened calmly as both women told their versions. Linda talked about the down payment she had given, the repairs she had paid for, and the promises she felt were broken. Kayla explained how overwhelmed she had been back then, how she surrendered the car as repayment, and how she later even rented the same car from her mother for 4 months, paying every cent on time. As the pieces came together, the mediator saw the truth. Linda had accepted the car back as repayment more than a year ago. She insured it, she kept it. She allowed her daughter to borrow it later as a renter, not as an owner. And she never mentioned any unpaid debt until Kayla appeared with a newer car and a more stable life. That wasn't debt. That was disappointment turned into resentment. The mediator gently told Linda, "You've already been compensated. When you received the car and its title, the financial connection between you and your daughter ended. It was settled then. This case is closed." Kayla took a breath she had held for months. Linda sat quietly, realizing perhaps for the first time how much her frustration had clouded her judgment. There was no villain, just 2 people, tangled in expectations and misunderstandings. When they stood up to leave, Kayla didn't say much, but she gave her mother a hesitant smile. A small one, but genuine. And for the first time in a long time, Linda didn't look away. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was the beginning of healing. For the first time in years, the tension between Linda and Kayla softened. Just a little, but enough to breathe. After leaving the community dispute center, they walked separately to their cars. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows on the pavement, and for a moment neither of them quite knew how to act. Kayla sat in her car for a few moments, hands resting on the steering wheel. She felt strangely empty, like she had been carrying around a backpack full of rocks, and someone had finally lifted it off her shoulders. But in the space where the weight used to be, there was a kind of trembling, unfamiliar lightness. She opened the window, letting the warm breeze touch her face. Part of her wanted to call her mom. Another part wanted to drive home without saying a single word. She'd spent too long walking on eggshells, and the emotional exhaustion sat deep inside her bones. Meanwhile, on the other side of the parking lot, Linda stood by her car with the door halfway open. She wasn't angry anymore, just unsettled. The mediator's words kept replaying in her mind, not as accusations, but as truth she couldn't run from anymore. You accepted the car as repayment. The matter was settled a long time ago. Linda had always prided herself on being the strong one, the parent who knew what was right. Accepting that she might have let resentment grow into something unfair. That was a different kind of ache. She got into her car, but she didn't start it. Instead, she reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small white envelope, the one she had been carrying around for weeks. Its corners were a little bent from being moved around too many times. The envelope had Kayla's name written in Linda's careful handwriting, and inside it was something she had been too afraid to give. A letter, not a dramatic confession, not an apology wrapped in poetic words, just a simple, honest note she'd written on a night when guilt kept her wide awake. But every time she thought of handing it to her daughter, the emotions became too tangled. Pride, fear, regret. Kayla didn't know the letter existed. Linda hadn't even decided if she wanted her to. But that afternoon, after hearing the truth said aloud in a quiet little room, something inside Linda shifted. Her fingers brushed over the envelope again and again, as though gathering courage through touch. Across the parking lot, Kayla started her car. Linda watched her headlights flick on. For a moment, panic jolted through her chest. What if Kayla drove away, and the fragile softness between them disappeared like it had never existed? Before she could think it through, she opened her car door and stepped out. "Kayla," she called. Her voice cracked, more from emotion than volume. Kayla looked over her shoulder through the open window, confused at first. But when she saw her mother walking cautiously toward her with something small in her hand, her heart stuttered. She rolled the window down a bit more. "Yeah?" she asked quietly. Linda swallowed, her throat tight. She held out the envelope with both hands, like it was something fragile. I wrote this for you," she said. "A while ago. I didn't know the right moment to give it to you." Kayla stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it immediately. She felt her chest tighten, memories of old arguments swimming up like unwelcome ghosts. But something in Linda's face looked different. Less angry, less defensive, softer. Finally, Kayla reached out and took the envelope. "Should I open it now?" she asked. Linda shook her head gently. "Whenever you're ready." A pause settled between them, heavy, but not hostile. More like the quiet before a necessary conversation. Kayla nodded slowly and placed the envelope carefully on the passenger seat beside her. She didn't open it. Not yet. Her heart wasn't steady enough for whatever words waited inside. "Thank you," she said softly. Linda exhaled, as though she had been holding that breath for years. "I'm trying," she whispered. Kayla felt her eyes burn. "Me too." And for the first time in a very long time, they smiled at each other, small, uncertain smiles, but real. When Kayla finally drove away, she kept glancing at the envelope, feeling its presence like a heartbeat in the car. Something told her that whatever was written inside was going to change things. Maybe not everything, but something important, something long overdue.